The morning air was crisp outside the studio, but inside Good Morning America, the temperature felt warmer, charged with anticipation. The cameras were already rolling, capturing the pristine set bathed in bright lights that reflected off every polished surface. The audience, prepped and seated in neat rows, clapped and cheered at the sound of the band's opening notes. It was a typical morning in terms of production, lights, cameras, energy, but there was an undercurrent of tension in the air, subtle yet unmistakable, like the quiet before a storm. Michael Strahan, seated behind the familiar glossy desk, looked the part of the seasoned morning host, broad smile, effortless charm, posture relaxed yet confident. He glanced at the cue cards in front of him, then toward the side stage where his guest was about to appear. Everything appeared normal, but Strahan's experience told him something was slightly off. The cameras were ready, the crew poised, and the teleprompters flashing with the opening script, but the feeling of anticipation in the room wasn't just for the show, it was for the guest's entrance. Michael J. Fox emerged from backstage, moving with his characteristic energy, a mixture of charm and professionalism. He waved to the audience, whose applause rose in waves, and made his way to the desk with a confident gait, shaking hands with crew and hosts alike. The cameras followed his movements, capturing every detail, the slight crease of concentration on his forehead, the sparkle of his eyes, the careful placement of his hands as he adjusted himself in the chair. Even in casual conversation, every motion was magnified by the scrutiny of a live audience and a million viewers watching at home. The initial pleasantries flowed smoothly. Strahan leaned in slightly, attempting his usual warm approach. "Michael, it's so good to have you here. Your new project has been receiving a lot of attention. Everyone's talking about it. How does it feel to be back in the spotlight like this?" Michael smiled politely, keeping his voice even, controlled. "It's exciting, of course. I've really enjoyed this project. It's meaningful in ways I hope audiences will connect with. Every role has its challenges, but I focus on the story and the message rather than the spotlight itself." The audience applauded softly, impressed by his calm demeanor and professional attitude. The cameras caught their reaction, sweeping across the rows to capture the energy and excitement. For a moment, everything seemed perfectly normal. The rhythm of a morning show interview had taken hold, questions, answers, brief laughter, light anecdotes. It was smooth, polished, the kind of segment designed to put both guest and audience at ease. Then Strahan's tone subtly shifted, a slight tightening of his smile, a change almost imperceptible to most viewers but glaring to anyone paying attention. "Of course, but some critics have suggested you might be holding back when it comes to talking about personal challenges. Do you feel pressure to reveal more of yourself than you'd like?" The shift was electric. Michael's brow furrowed slightly, his smile remaining, but the polite mask was momentarily replaced by cautious wariness. "I try to be honest about what I share publicly," he replied, measured and steady. "But there's a line between meaningful discussion and intruding on personal matters. I want to be genuine, but I also value boundaries." Strahan's posture changed subtly, leaning in with a sharper edge to his tone. Sure, but audiences want the inside story. They want to know the real struggles behind the scenes. Aren't you worried that by being careful, you might sugarcoat things, leaving viewers with an incomplete picture?" A murmur rippled through the audience, a mix of curiosity and unease. Michael's jaw tightened imperceptibly. He had anticipated challenging questions, but there was something about the way Strahan was phrasing them, assertive, relentless, almost aggressive, that signaled this was no longer a simple promotional segment. It was a test, a subtle attempt to provoke a reaction. "I don't sugarcoat anything," Michael replied, his voice still calm but firm, resonating with the quiet authority he had cultivated over decades of interviews. "I speak to what's relevant and constructive. I don't feel compelled to expose every aspect of my private life for entertainment's sake, especially if it doesn't contribute to understanding the work itself." The audience shifted in their seats, sensing the rising tension. The cameras panned, capturing not just Michael and Strahan, but the subtle reactions of the crew, the co-hosts, and the live audience. Even Joy Behar and Robin Roberts leaned slightly forward, eyes narrowing, sensing the impending escalation. The polite surface of the show had begun to crack. Strahan's eyebrows drew together, a flicker of frustration crossing his face. "All right, but don't you think viewers want honesty? Especially when someone's life and career have been so public. There's an expectation that you'll open up, right?" Michael's expression remained calm, almost serene, but the intensity in his eyes was unmistakable. He leaned forward slightly, placing his hands on the desk, speaking clearly, decisively. "I've always valued honesty in my work and my interactions. But there's a difference between honesty and being manipulated into creating drama. You're framing your questions to provoke a certain reaction rather than to understand or explore. That's not responsible interviewing, it's trying to create controversy where none should exist." The studio fell into a thick silence, the kind of silence that is almost audible, heavy with anticipation. The audience, realizing they were witnessing something rare, shifted in their seats, leaning forward. The cameras lingered, capturing the micro-expressions, Strahan's flicker of surprise, the subtle admiration in Joy's eyes, the raised eyebrows of Robin and Lara. Even the band paused mid-strum, sensing that this was no ordinary segment. Strahan's smile faltered. He tried to redirect the conversation, attempting to regain control. "Michael, you're being a little—" "No," Michael interrupted, voice even, firm, unwavering. "I'm setting a boundary. This conversation is about my work, my film, and the story we're telling. It is not about creating headlines or questioning my character outside the scope of the project. That's where I draw the line." The audience reacted immediately, low murmurs of approval spreading across the room. Some clapped softly, unsure if they were allowed to, while others simply leaned back, absorbing the intensity of the exchange. The subtle power dynamic had shifted. Michael was no longer just a guest, he was commanding the stage with quiet authority. Strahan paused, realizing he had met an immovable force. The moment hung in the air, thick and charged. Michael had not raised his voice, had not insulted, had not lost his composure. Yet the weight of his presence, the precision of his words, had taken full control of the narrative. He had defined the terms of the conversation, and everyone, host, co-hosts, audience, and crew, felt it. Even the production team behind the monitors leaned in, whispering among themselves. "This is going to blow up online," one muttered. "People are going to talk about this for weeks." The director nodded silently, acknowledging the truth in that observation. The segment had transcended its original purpose. It was no longer just a morning interview. It had become a defining moment of integrity, poise, and controlled assertiveness. The moment Michael J. Fox stood, straightened his posture, and gave a firm but polite nod, the entire studio felt the weight of his presence. The audience, already on edge from the previous exchange, let out a collective intake of breath. Cameras continued rolling, capturing the subtle tremor in Strahan's normally composed expression, the exchange of glances between co-hosts, and the quiet murmurs of the audience. Every microsecond was amplified in real time, and the tension in the room was now almost palpable, like electricity before a storm. Strahan opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out immediately. His usual confident smile faltered, replaced with a mixture of disbelief and frustration. He had been in countless live interviews, handling guests with varying temperaments, but this was unlike anything he had experienced before. Michael wasn't arguing or shouting, he was asserting control, establishing boundaries, and refusing to be manipulated into a sensational moment. The realization hit Strahan, the segment had completely slipped out of his control. Backstage, producers were scrambling to adjust. Assistant directors whispered into headsets, coordinating with camera operators to ensure coverage remained steady. The floor manager signaled for a pause, but in a live broadcast, there is no pause. Every moment was permanent, every expression recorded for posterity. Social media feeds were already lighting up with speculation, even before the segment had ended. Clips were being streamed live to smartphones, with viewers posting reactions in real time, sensing a dramatic confrontation unfolding. Michael's departure from the stage was measured and deliberate. He didn't storm out, he didn't slam doors, he simply walked with quiet dignity, hands relaxed at his sides, head held high. Each step resonated with calm authority. The cameras followed him, capturing every detail, from the way the studio lights reflected off his hair to the subtle expressions of crew members who now looked equally impressed and nervous. The audience remained frozen, caught between disbelief and admiration, some applauding softly while others murmured to their neighbors. Strahan finally regained his voice, attempting to maintain some semblance of control over the segment. "Well, that was unexpected," he said, though the words came out strained, lacking their usual buoyancy. He forced a smile, attempting to project levity, but it fell flat against the undeniable weight of what had just transpired. His tone, usually authoritative and confident, carried an edge of uncertainty. The cameras caught his slight tremor, the subtle narrowing of his eyes, and the slight tilt of his head as he processed the loss of control in real time. The co-hosts quickly adjusted, trying to steer the conversation back to familiar territory. Robin Roberts and Laura Spencer exchanged brief, worried glances, then nodded slightly, acknowledging the need to stabilize the broadcast. Joy Behar leaned back, her hands folded in her lap, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing at the corners of her mouth.